Hello students, I am Rahul Sharad Joshi, Assistant Professor at the Bhopal School of Social Sciences. I would be taking lectures on income tax, and the topic I have chosen for today is residential status of an individual. Now the very basic thing which comes to our mind after we listen to the topic is why really we need to determine the residential status. The plain vanilla answer would be simply to ascertain the correct amount of tax liability. Now before we go into the technicalities, I would like to go through some general prepositions which we need to consider before we go into calculations. The very first point would be a residential status is always calculated for a previous year, which in our case would be 2018-19 and not for the assessment year. Second would be residential status of an individual may vary year after year. It may vary, it not necessarily will vary, but hence it may vary. We need to calculate residential status year after year. Number third, it will be a person who is a resident in India can also be a resident in any other country for the same previous year. Number fourth would be residential status of an individual and citizenship are two different concepts. An individual may be a citizen of India, but he may not be a resident of India for income tax purpose. Now we will be going to technicalities of determination of residential status. From income tax point of view, taxpayers are broadly categorized into two categories. First is resident and second is non-resident. Now when we become resident, we again subcategorize into two parts. First is ordinarily resident and second is not ordinarily resident. I would like to repeat it. From income tax point of view, we take two categories, resident and non-resident. And when we become resident, then we are again subcategorized into two parts, that is ordinarily resident and not ordinarily resident. So very first thing is we need to become a resident. So now how do we become resident? There are two basic conditions for becoming a resident. First basic condition says an individual needs to be in India for a period of 182 days or more during the previous year, which is 18-19. And the second basic condition says an individual needs to be in India for a period of 60 days in the previous year. In addition to this, he should be in India for a period of 365 days or more during the 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. Now for becoming a resident, an individual needs to fulfill any one of these two basic conditions. Now what happens if he doesn't fulfill any of these basic conditions? The moment he doesn't fulfill any of the basic conditions, he is termed as non-resident. Now I would go on certain exceptions or special cases. Now what are these special cases, what are these exceptions? I would be telling the relevance afterwards. First I will go through the exceptions. The first exception is if an individual who is a citizen of India goes outside India for the purpose of employment. Here I would like to call your attention. There are two instances where we can define for going outside for employment purpose. First would be an unemployed person going outside India for taking up employment. Second instance could be a person who is employed in India, but his current employer is giving him a foreign assignment, and for that foreign assignment he goes outside India. Both these instances will be covered under going abroad for employment purpose. Now one more important point to be noted. Going abroad for employment purpose is different from going abroad in connection with employment. Now the example for connection in employment would be, say Mr. X is having a business in India. He goes to Japan for purchasing raw materials. From there he proceeds to USA for attending a conference. Even Mr. X is going abroad, but the way he is going, that will not be termed as for employment purpose, that would be taken as in connection with employment. So Mr. X will not be covered under exception because he is not going for employment purpose, he is going in connection with employment. Now exception number two, an individual who is a citizen of India goes outside India as a member of crew of an Indian ship. This individual will be covered under second exception. Now the third one, an individual who is a citizen of India or a person of Indian origin who normally resides outside India but comes on a visit to India during previous year. This will be covered under the third exception. Now how do I define a person of Indian origin? Indian origin can be defined as an individual, his parents, mother and father, his grandparents, both paternal and maternal. So, in this case we have 7 individuals. How 7? Number first, the individual himself. Number second, his father. Number third, his mother. Number 4, maternal grandfather. Number 5, maternal grandmother. Number 6, paternal grandfather. Number 7, paternal grandmother. These 7 individuals. If any of these 7 individuals is born in undivided India, I repeat, if any of these 7 individuals is born in undivided India, the individual will be known as a person of Indian origin. Now we have studied the 3 exceptions. Now the next question arises is, what is the relevance of these 3 exceptions? I would just like to go over to basics once again. You must be remembering that we have studied 2 basic conditions. If an individual fulfills any one of the basic conditions, he becomes resident. Now the relevance of the exceptions which we have just studied. In these 3 exceptions, if an individual falls under any of these 3 exceptions, in that case, to find out whether that individual is a resident or not, we have only the first basic condition, which says that an individual has to be in India for a period of at least 182 days. In these 3 cases, second basic condition becomes irrelevant. I repeat, second basic conditions becomes irrelevant. If he fulfills the first basic condition, he becomes a resident. If he does not fulfill the first basic condition, he becomes non-resident. Next, as now we have determined that he is resident, now we will proceed to find out whether he is ordinarily resident or he is a not ordinarily resident. To find out this, law has given us 2 additional conditions. Additional condition number 1. Additional condition number 1 says an individual has to be resident in India. I repeat, an individual has to be resident in India in any 2 years out of the 10 years immediately preceding the relevant previous year. Additional condition number 2, an individual should be in India for at least a period of 730 days or more during the 7 years immediately preceding the relevant previous year. If an individual fulfills both these additional conditions, then he is termed as resident and ordinarily resident. If an individual does not fulfill any of the additional conditions, he is termed as resident and not ordinarily resident. It means an individual can be resident and not ordinarily resident in 2 ways. Number 1, he fulfills one of the basic conditions and none of the additional conditions. Number 2, he fulfills one of the basic conditions and one of the additional conditions. In both these cases, an individual will be termed as resident and not ordinarily resident. So I would like to sum it up. How do I become a resident? If I fulfill any one of the basic condition. What happens if I don't fulfill any of the basic condition? Automatically I become a non-resident. Then if I become a resident, I don't stop there. I need to find out whether I am ordinarily resident or I am not ordinarily resident. For that, law has given me additional conditions. If I fulfill both the additional conditions, I become resident and ordinarily resident. If I don't fulfill any of the additional conditions, resident and not ordinarily resident. Even if I fulfill one additional condition, still I am resident and not ordinarily resident. Now there are certain important points which are applicable for both basic and additional conditions. Point number 1, stay should be in India. Law doesn't say that stay should be at a particular place. It can be anywhere in India. Number 2, law doesn't say that the stay should be continuous. It may be with gaps. You may be in India for a certain period of time, then you go abroad, then you again come to India. And the third one is, the day you go out of India and the day you come into India, both the days are calculated as your stay in India. Now as we have discussed all technicalities about the residential status, one important point which I would like to point is, just look at the 2 basic conditions and 2 additional conditions. First basic condition says individual should be in India. Second basic condition says individual should be in India. First additional condition says individual should be resident in India, and again the second additional condition says individual should be in India. Now what point I want to make clear is, out of the 4 conditions, 3 conditions says individual should be in India, whereas the 4th condition says individual should be resident in India. This is very important point. What does that point mean? Being a resident in India means an individual needs to fulfill any one of the basic condition for those 2 years. I would be making this point very clear when we go with the example. Now we will take an example as to how to determine the residential status. The question which we have taken is, Chris Gayle, a West Indies cricketer, comes to India every year for 100 days. Determine his residential status for the assessment year 1920. When you get a question of a residential status, the very first thing we need to check it whether the individual is falling under any of the 3 exceptions. First exception, an individual who is a citizen of India goes outside India for the purpose of employment. Second one, individual who is a citizen of India goes outside India as a member of crew of an Indian ship. And the third exception, an individual who is a citizen of India or a person of Indian origin normally resides outside India but comes on a visit to India. Now we need to check whether Chris Gayle falls under any of the 3 exceptions. Now is Chris Gayle a citizen of India? No. So he is not falling under the first exception or the second exception. Now is Chris Gayle a person of Indian origin? Again the answer is in no. It means Chris Gayle is not falling under any of the 3 exceptions. What does this mean? Now to find out whether Chris Gayle is a resident or not, we have 2 basic conditions. So now we will go step by step. So one thing is clear, that he is not under exception. Now the first basic condition is, he has to be in India for a period of 182 days or more during previous year 1819. Now as the question clearly says that Chris is coming to India every year for 100 days, so even in the year 1819 he would have been in India for 100 days, which means he is not satisfying the first basic condition. So this is a big no, because Chris is coming only for 100 days, and for fulfilling the first basic condition he needs to be in India for at least 182 days. But as Chris is not covered under any of the exceptions, we even have the second basic condition to find out whether Chris is resident or not. So now we will go and see whether he is falling under the second basic condition or not. So the second basic condition, first I will say the technical language, then I will explain it. Second basic condition says an individual needs to be in India for a period of 60 days or more in the previous year, plus he should be in India for a period of 365 days or more during the 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. Now what does this mean? See, my previous year is 1819, this is my previous year. Law says in previous year minimum number of days should be 60. 60 is the minimum number of days which law says. Now plus 4 years immediately preceding the previous years. My previous year is 1819, now I will take 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. 4 years would be 1718 and 1415. These are my 4 years immediately preceding the relevant previous year. Law says in this 4 years he should be in India for a minimum period of 365 days. Now we will see whether Chris fulfills these conditions or not. As Chris is coming every year for 100 days, even in the year 1819 he was there for 100 days, which is more than 60 days, he fulfills this condition. Now in the 4 years again every year he is coming for 100 days, so 4 years he is coming for 400 days, which is again greater than 365 days. It means Chris is fulfilling the second basic condition. In the previous year he is for more than 60 days, and in the preceding 4 years he is for 400 days, which is more than 365 days. So Chris becomes resident in India because he fulfills the second basic condition. Now the moment we come to know that Chris becomes a resident in India, we cannot stop here. We need to go further and find out whether Chris is ordinarily resident or not ordinarily resident. For that thing, law has given us 2 additional conditions. Now we will check whether Chris is fulfilling both the additional conditions or not. We will first go through the first additional conditions, which is a bit technical one, so just make it clear you understand it. What does the first additional condition says? An individual should be resident in any 2 years out of the 10 years immediately preceding the relevant previous year. Now we have taken 10 previous years immediately preceding the relevant previous year. My previous year is 18-19. Excluding my previous year, 10 years I have gone behind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Now what the law requires? Law requires out of these 10 years, Chris should be resident in any 2 years. I repeat, Chris should be resident in any 2 years. What does that mean? It means that Chris needs to fulfill any one of the basic condition in any of the 2 years. Now we will check both the basic conditions one by one. As Chris is coming for 100 days every year in all the years, does he fulfills the first basic condition? What does the first basic condition says? First basic condition says he should be in India for at least a period of 182 days. In any of these 10 years, is Chris coming for more than 182 days? No. It means Chris is not fulfilling the first basic condition. Now we will see whether Chris is fulfilling the second basic condition. The second basic condition is again the same one. In addition to 60 days in the previous year, it should be 365 days or more during the 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. So for example, if we take 17-18 as year, previous year, is Chris more than 60 days in 17-18? Yes, he is for 100 days. Now if we take 17-18 as previous year, we will go 4 years preceding this, first, second, third and fourth. In these 4 years, is Chris for more than 365 days? Yes, Chris is there for 400 days. It means we can say that Chris is resident in the year 17-18. I repeat, what we have done is we have taken 17-18 as our previous year. If we take 17-18 as the previous year, we will check whether Chris was for more than 60 days in the previous year. Yes, he was there for 100 days. Now we will go 4 years preceding the previous year, which is 16-17, 15-16, 14-15 and 13-14. These are the 4 years which are preceding the previous years. Now in this 4 years, is Chris for more than 365 days? Yes, he is for 400 days. So we can very well say that Chris is resident in the year 17-18. This is 1 year, we need another year. Now we can take any year. For example, we take 12-13 as previous year. We take 12-13 as previous year. In this year we can check whether Chris is for more than 60 days. Yes, again he is for 100, again he is staying there for 100 days. Now we will take 4 years preceding 12-13, which is 11-12, 10-11, 9-10 and 8-9. Cumulatively for these 4 years, is Chris staying in India for more than 365 days? Yes, again he is there for 400 days. So again we can say that Chris is resident in the year 12-13. Now each one of you is at a liberty to take any previous year. If you take previous year as 15-16, you will check that whether he was for 60 days or more in 15-16, and you will go 4 years preceding 15-16, that is 14-15, 13-14, 12-13 and 11-12. You will check whether for those 4 years he was for more than 400 days. The answer would be the same whichever previous year you will take, because he is coming to India every year for 100 days. So in this case we can say that Chris is resident in the year 1213 and 1718. It means he is fulfilling the first additional condition. Now I will check the second additional condition. Second additional condition is again a simple one. Second additional condition says an individual needs to be in India for a period of 730 days or more during the 7 years immediately preceding the relevant previous year. My previous year is 1819. Now I need to go 7 years beyond that, so 1718 and 1112. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now second additional condition says preceding the previous year means 1819 is my previous year. Leaving this, I need to go 7 years back, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Second additional condition says that in these 7 years Chris needs to be in India for a period of at least 730 days. Now is Chris fulfilling this condition? Chris is coming every year for how many days? 100 days. So in 7 years he is only being in India for 700 days, which is less than 730. It means he is not fulfilling the second additional condition, because for fulfilling the second additional conditions he needs to be in India for at least 730 days and he is in India only for 700 days. So he is not fulfilling the second additional condition. So now what the summary is? He is fulfilling one basic condition and one additional condition. Because of that Chris becomes resident and not ordinarily resident. Now this is all about residential status from my side. Hope you must have learned something about residential status. Now we will be meeting another time in the next lecture. Thank you so much.